Thought the event was amazing. I thought that I knew a lot about real estate, but coming to your seminar, I realized there's a lot of things that I don't know. And one thing that you did besides teach me a lot about real estate is you inspired me to look beyond where I live and to, kind of shrink down the world and make it smaller so that I can invest in places that are further away and get better returns. So I really appreciate that, and I'm excited to be here this weekend. And again, for me and from all the people I heard there, thanks for doing these events because they're great.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1015. This is your host, Jason Hartman. Thank you so much for joining me today. So today we will continue with part 2 as we talk about some predictions, the economy, the housing market, etc., etc. But before we get into that, before we get into part 2 of our very fascinating guest from last week, the chief economist for Windermere Real Estate, I want to talk to you a little bit about something that we have only touched on over the years on the show, and that is the impact on our income property investments and the broader economy of Generation Z. Gen Z. Yes, we're not talking about the millennials. We're not talking about Generation Y. We're not talking about my generation, Gen X. And we're not talking about the baby boomers. We're talking about the younger ones who are now coming up. It really speaks to how long this show has been running. I mean, you've been listening to me since maybe 2005 or 2006, haven't you? Yes, hopefully you have. Thank you for being such loyal listeners for so many years. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And I wanted to remind you newer listeners and you people that want just sort of a recap of some of our our main points, you can always go to jasonhartman.com/start. That's jasonhartman.com/start, where you can find some hand-picked episodes that will help you really get kind of some of the core ideas of my real estate investing philosophy and some of the core guests that I've had on the show over the years that help you understand, digest, and certainly implement this stuff. Because what we are about is the real world, not the theory. We're not sitting in some ivory tower like those overpaid, underworked professors brainwashing your college kids with Marxist ideas. But I digress. No, we are not that. We are the practical. That's what we talk about on the show here, the practical, the real world stuff. And guess what? You don't have to pay for some rip-off $40,000 coaching program to learn it all. You get it all here for free and for a very low cost if you come to one of our live events or buy one of our educational products, which, by the way, many of you have asked for the audio from our Meet the Masters, our recent Meet the Masters a few months ago. That is available at hartmaneducation.com. That's hartmaneducation.com. So for the main points of the show, some hand-picked episodes for you, because I know listening to 1,015 episodes is a tall order, but I know you'll get to it because you'll love it. It's great. It's good education. And education is the shortest distance between poverty and wealth. It is the thing you need to get you there quicker and get out of the rat race. So jasonhartman.com/start for that. That's all totally free, of course. and for some of our informational products and audios and videos of some of our live events over the years, hartmaneducation.com. hartmaneducation.com. Totally different website. Okay, so we've made many predictions over many years of doing this show, and many of them have been very right on. I will pat myself on the back for that. The one that I always say I've been rather inaccurate about until now. I guess a broken clock is right twice a day, as the saying goes, right? I've been very bad at predicting interest rates, but I'm finally going to be right after all these years because rates really are rising. So there's some urgency to buy some more properties. You can take a look at jasonhartman.com/properties. But better yet, really, you got to talk to your investment counselor because the inventory is so scarce and the market is moving so quickly that you really have to have your investment counselor with my company here helping you for free. You can reach out to them in any web form at jasonhartman.com, and they will find properties for you many times before they even come on the market. So that's really the way you have to do it. But take a browse at jasonhartman.com/properties, and you'll see that. Okay, Generation Z. Well, there's a lot to talk about Generation Z as they move into the rental market and then the home buying market. But one point, as I saw this article recently by Pushpa Gowda, and this is in Globe Street, talking about 7 ways Generation Z will change commercial real estate. Now, here they're looking at it more from the business angle, the business of being a commercial real estate broker or developer or things like that. We're not too concerned with that. What we're concerned with is how it affects our investments, what it means to the overall economy, what it means to our income property. How will it affect us, right? A funny subtitle of this article is 40% of Generation Z said that working Wi-Fi was more important to them than working bathrooms. You know, I will agree with them. I think being connected is really super important. But she outlines these 7 things in the article. And when I came to number 3, I thought, hey, another one of my predictions is coming true, because she says a suburban revival. That's trend number 3, right? And I've been predicting this for a long time. I said the resurgence of the suburbs. The suburbs are coming back, folks. For a couple of decades, we've been moving into the urban core in all these different American cities, and there's been an urban revival. And people have been moving away from the burbs. They want walkable communities, they want restaurants, they want entertainment, they want coffee shops, all of that great stuff that you have in the city, in the urban core. When I say urban core, I don't necessarily mean the bad urban core. A lot of these urban core areas are bad. In fact, you look at many cities around the U.S. with very scary urban cores, violence, crime, homelessness, etc. What gets rewarded gets repeated. What gets rewarded gets repeated. The greatest management principle in the world. And for 5 decades, politicians have rewarded all of these bad things. And guess what? They've grown. If you want something to grow, subsidize it. If you want something to die, tax it and regulate it. And so, we've had this, right? So we've had the urban revival, but I predicted the resurgence of the suburbs. And the main reason I predicted that was due to the self-driving car. Autonomous vehicles, I think, will lead to a resurgence of the suburbs where housing costs are lower, where yards are larger, houses are larger, and the burbs are nice. The crime is low. The suburbs offer a lot of nice things. They certainly do. And if driving to the city isn't a chore anymore, it will make the suburban areas with lower cost real estate and the exurban areas, the exurbs, not just the suburbs, it will make these areas more attractive. So what she says here in the article is, as Generation Z is just beginning to come of age, they are slowly entering the housing market. Yet many are currently renters. They aren't content staying renters for long, in part due to skyrocketing rental prices across the country. Well, I don't know if that makes much sense because, hey, housing prices have skyrocketed too. So rents and for sale prices are both up. But whatever, we'll let that comment go without agonizing over it, okay? So rents are certainly going up. Yes, she's right about that. Across the country, right, these increasing prices, but also because they are more family-oriented and will be settling down. They will be raising children. It may not be the same as their elders' generation. Who are their elders? I guess it's Gen X. It's not Gen Y. They haven't really had adult age kids yet, right? So it's Gen X and very maybe baby boomers who waited a long time to have children. Hey, did you see that Bridget Nielsen? She's pregnant. Yes, she is pregnant. She was a movie star, not too big a deal of one, but was in some movies, right? You remember her maybe? Guess what? She's pregnant. And guess how old she is? She's 54. Yep. She's not 24. She's not 34. She's not even 44. She's 54 years old. 54 years old. She's not even going to have a Gen Z baby. She's going to have a Gen AB. What will they call it? BB, AA? Will they do 2 letters the next time around as we have to get through the next series in the alphabet here with the generations? I don't know. We'll see what the names are. So anyway, the autonomous vehicle, game changer. I know. It sort of was moving along quickly, and then it got some bumps in the road, namely Tesla fatalities. We all knew that would happen. It's a symptom of technology. It always happens, right? It's just sadly the way it goes. Any new technology is going to have accidents. It's going to have problems, but it will eventually, they'll figure it out, right? They'll definitely figure it out. And when they do, it will change the world. It will change the world in terms of employment complexion. It will change the world in terms of housing complexion. And as I predicted many years ago, it will put downward pressure on high-priced, location driver real estate markets. The 3 primary value drivers of real estate from the beginning of time, even back when we were living in caves: location, location, location. And this will change. It may not be a mega trend shift. Location still matters. The 3 blocks around your home still matters. The 3 blocks around your rental property still matters, but it's going to matter less. So the high-priced real estate markets will see downward pressure, and the lower-priced suburban and exurban markets will have a resurgence. Jason Hartman prediction, it will come true. I wasn't quite as cocky and confident about my interest rate prediction. That was wrong, but it's finally going to be right. But this one, I'm pretty sure it's sort of obvious, right? Not hard to predict. It says in this commercial real estate article, it says, the suburbs are not dead, even though we've seen a lot of shift toward downtowns across the country. Don't count the suburbs out, okay? And this is her words, not mine. This will force companies to re-examine their headquarters location when considering long-term moves, okay? And office occupier trends will change, right? So a bunch of changes. Generation Z, you're going to start hearing more and more about this. Gen Y has changed the world, no question, the millennials, but Gen Z even more so. Note something about Generation Z too. For all of their life, Generation Y, the millennial generation, they grew up with technology. Everybody said, well, they grew up with technology. They understand it, they relate to it, they get it. Yes, that's true. They did have an iPad when they were a little kid, right? But Generation Z is the first generation ever to not just grow up with technology, but to grow up bathed in, guess what? Do you know what I'm going to say? They have grown up bathed in social media. That was the technology of their formative years. And their entire life has been in the setting of social media. Think about the wide-ranging effects of something like that. That will have a huge impact on this generation, Generation Z. the young ones that are just coming up now in the ranks, as Gen Y is now becoming, they're adults. They're adulting. They say they're adulting. They're having their avocado toast for $16 and renting and adulting. They're trying to do their adulting thing. And that's a pretty funny word that they created, right? And as they're doing their adulting, they are a great rental market for us. And Gen Z, I think they'll be a great rental market for us too. Hey, maybe they are more family-oriented like the author of this article says. I'm not sure yet. Nobody knows yet. I still think they'll delay marriage, and they'll be renters for a lot longer. She seems to think they're going to want to be home buyers quicker than Generation Y. We'll see. That the jury's out on that one. I don't know yet, but more to come on that later. Anyway, let's get to part 2. Hear more about the economy and some predictions about the economy. This was a fascinating guest. We started with part 1 last Wednesday, and now let's dive into part 2. Here we go. The million-dollar question is the one you alluded to a few minutes ago, and kind of shifting gears a little bit, but not completely. Is there a housing bubble? And you just said $600,000 to $900,000 first-time home for millennials. Oh my God, I think that's so absurd. I can't even repeat it almost. I mean, they should be buying a $150,000 home, But the world has changed.
The trouble is the land's worth $150,000, let alone before you even put a house on it.
Right. And of course, it depends where you are. It's very much about location. But the banks, it feels like the banks have been pretty conservative this time around. I see little glimmers here and there of, low down payments, but the liar's loans aren't here. I mean, if we have a housing bubble, is it going to be caused by a mortgage crisis, a foreclosure crisis? I just can't imagine that this time around, because the banks have been pretty staid, it seems.
You're absolutely right. I think it's interesting to let's think back to the halcyon days of the early 2000s, where essentially, have a heartbeat, get a mortgage. Mm-hmm. It really was not that difficult at all. And that certainly is what drove the housing bubble. We've essentially moved from the sublime, everyone qualifying, to the ridiculous, no one qualifying.
Right. They've overcorrected. They really have.
Very, very much so. The average FICO scores on an approved loan last month were about 742, I believe.
Right.
So very, very high. Mm-hmm. The average FICO score for a denied conventional mortgage was 700.
Wow.
So even a credit score of 700 denied.
Won't get you a mortgage. Wow. I hate to say it, but that's ridiculous. I mean, there are a ton of 680 borrowers that should get mortgages, if you ask me. I mean,
I think you're right, but here's the kicker to that statement, though, Jason, and that is, let's say we drop down from 740 to 730, hypothetically. Well, that would essentially mean one thing. About another million households would then qualify for a mortgage. I don't need any more demand. Mm-hmm. I haven't got enough supply of houses as it is.
Exactly.
So by lowering it, all it's going to do is going to, again, further overheat the housing market.
Yeah, good point.
Are we in a housing bubble? Absolutely not. And as you said, credit quality is remarkably high, and that's essentially a function of Dodd-Frank, or it was. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not seeing that changing. Down payments are also considerably higher than we've seen in a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. So when we look at it in those terms, right now we're sitting on about $15 trillion worth of equity in our homes today.
Right.
So down payments are high. We haven't really added on to mortgage debt. It's basically the same amount of mortgage debt we have now as we had back in 2009, give or take. So that hasn't gone up. Home prices have. So the value of housing in America today is about $25 trillion. We have about $15 trillion of equity and about $10 trillion worth of debt. So we have a very substantial cushion underneath us in case something goes wrong individually. But the way I look at housing bubbles is essentially twofold. Two big things I look at. One of which is credit quality. Well, obviously that's very, very high. Down payments are very, very high as well. So that's not an issue. Secondly is, are we seeing as much home flipping that we saw back before the recession?
Right.
And that's it's basically speculative purchases and people buying, renovating, and flipping. That's actually continued to decline.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons many speculate that the home flipping has declined is because just this lack of inventory and increased construction cost. They can't make the margins work. I mean, we see it with our own providers. They are struggling to make the margins work. And, I have this discussion with them and I say, well, just raise the price. We can't. The appraisals won't come in. So it's like this catch catch-22 that they're in. They can't get the appraisals because the banks are too darn conservative, or the appraisers, I should say, to be more direct about it, and they just can't make the margins. So the example you gave before about the developer, the flipper is the same as the developer, really. If they can't make the money, they're not going to do the deal.
And you're absolutely right. And if you think about it, if they're looking to flip, or even if they're looking to buy a home which they're going to use as a single-family rental, if they're leveraging, if they're borrowing money against it, then the expected rental rate return, again, is not going to be sufficient. There's not going to be enough yield. So I think in both respects, credit quality being high, lower flipping activity going on, the loan-to-value ratios that I'm looking at right now, which is basically the value of the housing relative to the loan, is around 40% again, which is, again, essentially the long-term average. Mm-hmm. And to give you an idea, back when the housing bubble burst, it was up at about 65%. Mm-hmm. As long as that line is coming down or still flatlining, these are the indicators I look at relative to a housing bubble, and I'm just not seeing them. So I think our next contraction, our next business cycle recession will absolutely not be driven by the housing market.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more for all the reasons you mentioned. So what will it be driven by? Care to speculate on that one? Cryptocurrency bubble, student loan bubble, auto loans?
Take your pick. Auto loans, believe it or not, is something which I do worry about.
Yeah, I do too.
We're seeing default rates on car loans continuing to escalate.
I agree.
There's a couple of things that could drive it, one of which, unfortunately, the potential for trade wars. Mm-hmm. No one wins a trade war. President Xi from China made that statement several months ago. I agree with him. I think if we continue this isolationist policies coming out of our federal government, that could do it. Now, there are other things you need to look at as well. I think if we continue to see, or if we start to see, faster tightening by the Federal Reserve in terms of normalizing interest rates, if they do that too quickly, that could certainly achieve the same end and create a contraction. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately, you mentioned the R word, the nasty recession, and everyone obviously thinks back to 2008. This one, I think, is going to look very different. It's going to look like a more normalized business cycle recession. What do I mean by that? It'll look a lot, I think, like the 1991-92 recession. Right. It'll last 2 quarters. Unemployment rate won't rise above 6.5%, which essentially means that home prices will not go down. They'll flatline, but they won't go down. This country's had 47 recessions in its history. It will have 47 more.
Sure.
Business cycles happen.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of people need to be prepared for it, but don't necessarily need to think of it as being another housing bubble, great recession that we saw back in 2008 through 2009.
Great point. I agree. That was a once in a lifetime or twice in a lifetime thing. We had the Great Depression, and then 7 decades later, or even a little bit longer, we had the Great Recession. So those were anomalies. Those were huge events, obviously. But do you have just a moment? I know we've got to wrap it up. Just a moment to unpack the trade war statement. You mentioned nobody wins a trade war. How does the trade war, if you unpack that a little bit, cause a recession? I see that it makes prices go up. It makes supplies decline. It causes less consumption. And, when 72% of your economy is based on consumption, then you have a recession by reduced consumption. Is that it?
Yeah, and you're absolutely, and your numbers are absolutely right. How do we define recessions? We define recessions, technically speaking, as a 2-quarter contraction in GDP. Now, GDP, gross domestic product, is the value of goods and services that this country produces. And if that turns negative for 2 quarters, that actually technically equates to a recession. So imagine if we start imposing tariffs on all these other countries, Europe and Canada, Mexico and the like, and Japan, then it's likely that they will impose similar tariffs. So by doing that, that will then slow down the amount of goods that we will be producing to sell overseas, because the price overseas is going to go up by that much more. As that happens, companies will then look to slow down their production, potentially contract their employment base. That's kind of ultimately where it could go at a worst-case scenario.
Yeah, very interesting. Give out your website and tell people where they can find out more about you and your work. And, if you want to mention anything on interest rates, that's sort of the one major area we didn't discuss. Before you go, wrap it all up and we'll let you go.
Oh, sure. Yeah. There's a couple of things, one of which
I know it's a minor detail, interest rates, but,
Briefly, I know you mentioned about apartments, and are we going to continue to see apartment rentals rates continue to rise?
I think we will.
I expect that's going to slow down.
Yeah.
I think it's going to slow down because the supply-demand imbalance we were in is essentially getting back into balance again.
Right.
I think that any viewers or listeners of yours who are renters expect, depending on where in the country they are, that we will see slowing rental rate growth, just as we bring on a lot more supply.
Just maybe you want to distinguish that, though. You really refer to apartments. I mean, look, at every major American city has had cranes in the sky for years now, and they've been building institutional apartments for years. But in single-family home rents, I think that supply is still very constrained. I mean, that hasn't been oversupplied at all. So rental rates there probably pushing up, but apartments softening, right?
They are, but there's another little tweak to that as well,
okay,
Jason,
go.
And that is a group that I define as being called, I call them Boomerang Buyers.
Mm-hmm.
And who are these people? These are people that lost their homes to foreclosure back in 2008, 2010, whatever it was. As of this year, the early ones that lost their home to foreclosure now qualify to get a mortgage again.
Right.
They are going to start moving out of rented accommodation, and they're going to buy again.
Yeah,
so I would argue ultimately that the aggressive rental rate growth we've seen in single-family rentals is likely to start tapering.
Well, that's an interesting point. At the same time, though, you have the millennials moving into the market more. So we'll see. That's an interesting point. Yeah, they can qualify for mortgages, but you see higher prices because of this additional demand, right, of the people able to qualify, ultimately push rents up because, it's a rent-to-value ratio, ultimately. But, interesting.
And it is, but it's something which I think that where we've seen a lot of aggressiveness relative to people buying speculatively, buying homes to rent them out. What we are certainly seeing in the greater Seattle market is that demand is still solid, but the rental rate growth we've seen for the last 6-9 months has absolutely started to slow down.
Yeah, well.
So that's where I expect to see that going.
I agree. In Seattle, the rent-to-value ratios are totally out of whack because it's just such a booming, that market's been booming for so long now. It's absolutely crazy. But,
very much so.
Yeah. Well, congratulations for being in it, though. I'm sure you've done well.
Yeah. We are certainly doing well relative to a lot of parts of the country. But if I worry about one thing, what's the one thing that keeps me up at night? It is housing affordability.
Yeah, no question about it.
Because
it's very low.
If you can't provide housing for all income cohorts, the way I look at it is to imagine that you are the owner of a company. You're thinking about expanding into Seattle. What are the two things that you think about most? Well, those are going to be, one, is there a talented workforce?
Right.
Are there people out there that I can employ?
And you've got
we're very lucky in Seattle.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're smart, so we're very lucky. But the second part of the equation is, how much do you have to pay people?
You got to pay them $200,000 a year to afford a home in Seattle, so yeah.
Right, So we're in a situation right now whereby, and of course the biggest component of salaries is cost of living. So, i.e. shelter.
Yep.
So at some point, we're not there yet, but at some point companies that are thinking about being here will say, wow, I just can't afford it.
Yeah.
So they're going to start looking at other markets, which is why we're seeing a lot more interest east in Washington, Spokane, for example. Right. We're seeing a lot more interest in Boise, Idaho right now. At least Boise's building homes, which is a good thing. Many markets aren't. So I do fear if we cannot address the affordability issue, then the market up here, just in aggregate, is going to start becoming less competitive. And that is a concern of mine.
Yeah, I applaud you for being concerned about that. This is exactly what happens. Money is like, I call it the water theory of money. You spill a glass of water and it flows to the lowest point. And so money seeks out those lower priced tertiary markets. And that's what it always does. It has to.
Absolutely.
Because they're so constrained. Give out your website. Did you do that already? Just want to let you wrap it up.
You go to windermere.com/economics. You'll find all kinds of good stuff there.
Excellent.
I'd certainly be happy to answer any ancillary questions that any of your listeners might have.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we'd love to have you back again on the future. Matthew Gardner, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Jason. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.